All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be focusing on something that could be really useful for a lot of you out there, and that is the IELTS speaking test. Specifically, how to score very, very highly.
Yeah, because it's one thing to just sort of pass the IELTS
Yeah.
speaking, right? But to get a really, really high score to show that you're actually proficient in English, that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Exactly. And, as you know, there's three parts to the test, part 1, part 2, and part 3. Part 1 is the introduction and interview. Then you've got the long turn in part 2, which is also known as the cue card.
Right.
And then finally, we've got the discussion section, which is part 3. So we're going to go through each of those in detail, give you guys some strategies for each one, give you some example questions and really good example answers so you can see what it takes to actually get a band 8 or a band 9 in this test.
Yeah, and the goal, like you said, is to provide clear, actionable insights that you can implement right away so you don't feel lost.
No.
I remember when I first took the IELTS a long time ago, I was like, what do I do? How do I even prepare for this? So hopefully this will alleviate some of that.
Okay, so let's dive right into part 1, the introduction and interview. So this is going to be about 4 to 5 minutes long, and they're basically just going to ask you some general questions about yourself, like where you live, what you study or do for work, hobbies, interests, that sort of thing.
Right.
So it's pretty straightforward, and it's really just about demonstrating that you can discuss these familiar topics clearly and effectively. But there are some key approaches that you need to keep in mind if you want to get a high band.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is your first impression, so you want to make sure that you set the tone really well for the rest of the speaking test. And one of the ways to do that is, well, let me ask you this. What do you think is one of the biggest mistakes that people make in part 1 that prevents them from getting a high score?
I would say giving short answers, just kind of like 1 or 2 word answers and not really elaborating.
That's exactly right. So what we want to do is extend those answers. So let's say the examiner asks you, do you enjoy reading? Instead of just saying yes or yes, I do, extend that answer. Give them 2 to 3 sentences, maybe even more, because this gives you the opportunity to showcase a wider range of your vocabulary and grammar.
Right. So you could say something like, yes, I do enjoy reading. I find it to be a very relaxing activity, especially in the evenings. I particularly like reading novels and biographies.
Yeah, exactly. So you're giving them more information, and you're showing that you can actually speak fluently and at length.
Okay, so extend your answers. What else?
Another key element is showing a variety of sentence structures. The examiner is listening for your ability to use a range of grammatical structures, not just simple sentences.
Right. So you don't want to sound like a robot just saying like subject, verb, object, subject, verb, object. You want to kind of mix it up a bit. Use some complex sentences, use some relative clauses, some subordinate clauses, just to show that you have a good grasp of grammar.
Exactly. And it's not about using the most complicated grammar that you can think of. It's about using it naturally and appropriately.
Yeah, I remember when I was preparing for IELTS, I would try to just use like the most ridiculously complicated sentences. And it just didn't sound natural at all.
Right, yeah, and the examiner will pick up on that. So it's about using a range of grammar, but also making sure it's natural and it flows well.
Okay, so extend your answers, use a variety of sentence structures. What else should we keep in mind for part 1?
So another thing you want to think about is vocabulary. Obviously, vocabulary is important throughout the entire IELTS speaking test, but in part 1, since you're talking about familiar topics, it's a really good opportunity to show off some topic-specific vocabulary. So let's say the examiner asks you about your hometown. Instead of saying, my hometown has a lot of traffic, you could say something like, my hometown suffers from quite severe traffic congestion during peak hours. Right? You're using more sophisticated vocabulary to describe the same thing. Right. And you can do this for all sorts of topics. So if they ask you about your hobbies, your interests, just try to think about some slightly more advanced vocabulary that you can use to show off your range.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be like super obscure words, just words that are a little bit more advanced than the most basic ones.
Exactly. You don't want to sound like you're trying too hard, but you want to show that you have a good vocabulary.
Right. Okay, so vocabulary. Now, let's talk about how you actually say the words. What about pronunciation and intonation?
Well, that's another crucial element for scoring high in the IELTS speaking test. It's not enough to just know the right words and grammar. You also need to be able to pronounce them clearly and use natural intonation. Now, natural intonation means varying your pitch and rhythm as you would in a regular conversation. You don't want to speak in a monotone like a robot.
Right, because that's not how we naturally speak.
Exactly.
Okay, and what about those moments when you need a little bit of time to think? Maybe the examiner asks you a question that you weren't quite expecting and you need a few seconds to gather your thoughts. What should you do in those situations?
Yeah, that's perfectly normal. I mean, even native English speakers have moments where they need to pause and think. The key is to avoid long, awkward silences. So if you need a moment, you can use filler phrases like, that's an interesting question, or let me see, or let me think about that for a second.
Right. And these filler phrases are really useful because they buy you a little bit of time without making it seem like you're completely lost for words. And they also show the examiner that you're still engaged in the conversation.
Exactly. And another thing you can do is rephrase the question. So you could say something like, you're asking me about my favorite hobbies, or so you want to know what I like to do in my spare time.
Right. And that not only gives you a little bit of extra time to think, but it also shows the examiner that you've understood the question.
Exactly.
Okay, so those are some really good strategies for part one.
Yeah, and just to summarize, we talked about extending your answers, using a variety of sentence structures, using topic-specific vocabulary, making sure your pronunciation and intonation are clear and natural, and using filler phrases and rephrasing if you need a moment to think.
Okay, perfect. So now that we have a good understanding of the strategies for part one, let's actually look at some example questions that you might be asked.
Yeah, let's do that.
So as we mentioned earlier, part one is all about familiar topics, things like your home, your work or studies, your hobbies, your interests, your daily routine. You might also get questions about your future plans, or maybe some past experiences you've had. So let's say the examiner asks you, where do you live? Now, a lower band answer might be something like, I live in Mumbai. It is a big city with lots of people and shops. It's nice. Now, there's nothing grammatically wrong with that answer. It's just very basic.
Right. It's very simple.
Yeah, it doesn't really give the examiner much to work with. So how could we improve that answer to make it a high band response?
So to improve that answer, we can incorporate those strategies that we talked about. So instead of just saying, I live in Mumbai, we could say something like, I currently reside in a vibrant district located in the heart of Mumbai, a city known for its bustling energy and diverse cultural scene.
Okay, so immediately we've got much more sophisticated vocabulary. Reside, vibrant district, heart of Mumbai, bustling energy, diverse cultural scene. So that's already a big improvement.
Exactly. And then instead of just saying, it is a big city with lots of people and shops, we could say something like, my neighborhood offers a fascinating mix of modern high-rise buildings and traditional markets, creating a unique and lively atmosphere.
Right, so we're being more specific and descriptive. We're painting a picture of the place for the examiner. And we're also using some nice vocabulary there. Fascinating mix, high-rise buildings, traditional markets, unique, lively atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, instead of just saying, it's nice, we could give a reason why we like living there. So we could say something like, I particularly appreciate the convenient access to a wide range of amenities and the constant buzz of activity.
Okay, so again, we're being specific and giving reasons. We're not just making general statements.
Exactly.
Right, so that's a much better answer,
Yeah.
right? It's longer, it's more descriptive, it uses more sophisticated vocabulary, and it shows a better command of grammar.
Right. And you can apply these same principles to any question they ask you in part one. Just think about how you can extend your answer, use a variety of grammar, showcase some good vocabulary, and make sure your pronunciation and intonation are clear and natural.
Okay, perfect. So now let's move on to part two, the long turn, or as it's often called, the cue card. Now, in this part of the test, you're going to be given a card with a specific topic, and you'll have 1 minute to prepare a short talk on that topic. Then you'll have 1 to 2 minutes to actually give your talk.
Right.
So what are the key things we should focus on here to make sure we nail this part of the test?
So the first thing is that 1 minute of preparation time. That's super crucial because you really need to use that time effectively to plan out what you're going to say.
Right.
So when you get that cue card, don't panic.
Yeah.
Just take a deep breath, read through the topic and the prompts carefully, and then start jotting down some key ideas on a piece of paper. Think about what you want to say, how you want to structure your talk, and what kind of vocabulary you might want to use.
Okay.
Now, one really effective approach is to think of this as a short story. So start with a brief introduction to set the scene, then move into a more detailed description of the topic, maybe share a personal anecdote or experience that's relevant, and then finish with a brief conclusion to wrap things up.
Okay, so kind of like a beginning, middle, and end.
Exactly.
All right, so we've got our 1 minute of preparation time. We've planned out our little story. Now it's time to actually give the talk. What should we be focusing on here?
So during the talk itself, the key is to be fluent and coherent. You want to avoid long pauses or hesitations, and you want your ideas to flow together logically.
Right.
Now, one way to achieve this is to use linking words and phrases to connect your sentences and paragraphs. Words like however, moreover, in addition, on the other hand. These are all really useful for creating a smooth and coherent flow.
Yeah, they help to guide the listener through your talk, and they show that you can organize your thoughts in a logical way.
Right. And of course, you want to use descriptive language, just like in part one. Don't just state facts. Try to bring your talk to life with vivid details, imagery, and examples.
Okay.
And one final tip is to make eye contact with the examiner.
Okay.
Don't just stare down at your notes the whole time. Look up, engage with the examiner, and try to project your voice so that you sound confident and enthusiastic.
Right, because remember, this is a speaking test. It's not just about what you say. It's about how you say it.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's look at an example cue card topic to see how we can put all of this into practice. So let's say the topic is, describe a memorable trip you've taken.
Okay.
Now, a lower band answer might be something like, I went to Japan last year. It was nice. I saw temples and ate good food. The weather was good. I liked the trip. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with this answer grammatically. It's just very basic and it lacks detail.
Right. It doesn't really tell us anything about the trip. It's just a list of facts.
Exactly. So how can we make this a high band response?
So let's start by adding some more descriptive language. Instead of just saying, I went to Japan last year, we could say something like, one journey that stands out in my memory is a trip I took to the enchanting city of Kyoto in Japan a couple of years ago. So we're already setting the scene and creating a more vivid image in the listener's mind.
Okay. Enchanting city of Kyoto.
Right. And then instead of just saying, it was nice, we could say something like, what made this trip so special was the incredible beauty of the city, especially during the spring when the cherry blossoms were in full bloom, transforming the landscape into a sea of delicate pink and white.
Okay, that's beautiful imagery. I can almost picture it now.
Right. And then we can elaborate on some of the things that we did on the trip. So instead of just saying, I saw temples, we could say something like, I spent hours wandering through ancient Zen gardens, marveling at the serenity and tranquility of these sacred spaces.
Okay, so again, we're adding more detail and using more descriptive language.
Exactly. And we can do the same for the food. Instead of just saying, I ate good food, we could say something like, I savored the exquisite flavors of traditional Japanese cuisine. From delicate sushi to hearty ramen, each dish a culinary masterpiece.
Okay, so we're painting a really vivid picture of this trip for the examiner.
Right. And then finally, we need to wrap things up with the conclusion. So instead of just saying, I liked the trip, we could say something like, in retrospect, this trip to Kyoto was more than just a vacation. It was a journey of cultural discovery and personal reflection, an experience that has left an enduring mark on my soul.
Wow. Okay, so that's a much more powerful conclusion than just saying, I liked the trip.
Right. So you can see how by adding more detail, using descriptive language, and structuring our talk like a story, we've turned a very basic answer into a high band response.
Okay, that's really helpful. So now let's move on to the final part of the test, part 3, the discussion. Now, this part of the test is a little bit different from the previous 2 parts. In part 3, the examiner is going to ask you some more abstract questions that are related to the topic you talked about in part 2.
Right.
So it's going to be more about discussing broader issues and expressing your opinions.
Exactly. And the examiner is really looking to see how well you can develop your ideas, justify your opinions, and engage in a more complex discussion.
Right, so it's not enough to just give one-sentence answers anymore.
No, you really need to elaborate and explain your thinking.
Okay. So what are some key strategies for scoring high in part 3?
So the first thing is to give detailed and well-structured answers.
Okay.
Don't just say, I think, or I believe. You need to back up your opinions with reasons, examples, and maybe even some personal anecdotes if they're relevant.
Right, you need to show the examiner that you've actually thought about these issues and that you have a reasoned opinion.
Exactly. And you also want to use a range of vocabulary and grammar, just like in the previous 2 parts. This is your last chance to really impress the examiner with your language skills.
Right.
And finally, you want to show that you can engage in a discussion. Listen attentively to what the examiner is saying, respond to their questions thoughtfully, and don't be afraid to politely disagree or offer a different perspective.
Okay, so it's all about showing that you can think critically, express your opinions clearly, and engage in a mature conversation.
Exactly.
All right, so let's go back to our example topic from part 2, the memorable trip to Japan.
Okay.
Now, a possible part 3 question related to that topic could be something like, how has tourism changed in recent years?
Okay.
Now, a lower band answer might be something like, tourism is different now. More people travel. Flights are cheaper. Before, people used travel agencies, but now they use the internet. Again, there's nothing wrong with that answer grammatically,
Yeah.
but it's very superficial and it lacks depth.
Right. It's just stating some basic facts.
Exactly.
Yep.
So how can we elevate that answer to make it a high band response?
So, to start with, we can provide a more nuanced overview of the changes in tourism. We could say something like, the landscape of tourism has undergone a significant transformation in recent decades, primarily driven by advancements in technology and increased global interconnectedness.
Okay.
So we're already showing a deeper understanding of the issue.
Right. We're not just saying tourism is different now. We're giving a more specific and analytical overview.
Exactly. And then we can elaborate on some of the specific ways that tourism has changed.
Okay.
So we could say something like, in the past, individuals typically relied on travel agencies to organize their trips, but now the internet has empowered travelers to plan their own itineraries with ease.
Right. And we could even give some specific examples of how the internet has changed tourism.
Exactly. We could talk about online booking platforms, travel blogs, social media, all of these things that have made it easier for people to research and plan their trips independently.
Okay. And what about the fact that more people are traveling now?
Yeah, so we could say something like, furthermore, the rise of budget airlines has made air travel more affordable, enabling a much broader segment of the population to experience different cultures and destinations.
Okay.
So we're not just saying that more people are traveling, we're explaining why this is happening.
Right. And we're also using some nice vocabulary there.
Yeah.
Budget airlines, affordable, broader segment of the population.
Exactly. Now, it's also important to acknowledge that these changes in tourism haven't all been positive.
Right.
There are some downsides to the increase in travel.
Okay.
So we could say something like, however, this surge in tourism has also raised concerns about the environmental impact on popular destinations.
Right. We could talk about things like over-tourism, pollution, damage to natural habitats.
Exactly. And we could even offer some potential solutions. We could talk about the importance of sustainable tourism practices or the need for governments to regulate the tourism industry more effectively.
Okay, so we're showing the examiner that we can think critically about the issue and that we're aware of both the positive and negative aspects.
Exactly. And then we can wrap things up with a brief conclusion. So we could say something like, overall, while the tourism industry continues to evolve, it's crucial that we find ways to balance the economic benefits of travel with the need to protect the environment and the cultural integrity of the places we visit.
Okay, so we've taken a very basic answer and turned it into a much more sophisticated and well-developed response.
Right, and that's what the examiner is looking for in part 3. They want to see that you can think critically, express your opinions clearly, and engage in a more in-depth discussion.
All right, so we've now covered all 3 parts of the IELTS speaking test. So before we wrap things up, let's just quickly summarize some of the best practices for achieving a high score.
Yeah, let's do that.
So first and foremost, practice is key.
Absolutely.
The more you practice speaking English, the more confident and fluent you'll become.
Right, and you can practice with friends, with family, with a language partner, or even just by yourself.
Okay. And what about vocabulary and grammar?
Well, obviously, vocabulary and grammar are essential for any language test, but they're especially important for the IELTS speaking test because the examiner is listening very carefully to how you use language.
Right.
So make sure you have a wide range of vocabulary and that you can use it accurately and appropriately.
Okay, and one way to do that is to read widely and to make a conscious effort to learn new words and phrases.
Exactly. And when it comes to grammar, make sure you're familiar with all the different tenses and grammatical structures and that you can use them correctly in different contexts.
Okay, and one way to improve your grammar is to do lots of practice exercises and to get feedback from a teacher or a tutor.
Right.
Okay, and what about pronunciation and intonation?
So pronunciation and intonation are also crucial for the IELTS speaking test. You need to be able to pronounce words clearly and to use natural intonation so that the examiner can understand you easily.
Okay, and one way to improve your pronunciation is to listen to native English speakers, watch movies, TV shows, listen to podcasts, and try to imitate the way they speak.
Exactly. And there are also lots of online resources and apps that can help you with pronunciation.
Okay, great. Now, what about those moments when you get stuck? Maybe you can't think of the right word or you're not sure how to express something. What should you do in those situations?
Yeah, that's going to happen to everyone at some point. So the key is to not panic.
Right.
Just take a deep breath and try to rephrase what you want to say.
Okay.
Or you can use filler phrases like, let me see, or what I mean is to buy yourself a little bit of time.
Right.
And don't be afraid to ask the examiner to repeat the question or to clarify something if you're not sure what they're asking.
Okay, that's good advice. And finally, let's talk about confidence.
Yes, confidence is so important.
If you go into the test feeling nervous and unsure of yourself, it's going to show in your performance.
Right. So try to stay calm, focus on what you want to say, and believe in yourself.
And remember, the examiner is not there to trick you or to catch you out. They're just trying to assess your English speaking abilities.
Exactly. And even if you make a mistake, don't let it throw you off. Just correct yourself if you can and keep going.
Okay, perfect. So those are some of the key things to keep in mind if you want to achieve a high score on the IELTS speaking test.
Right. And remember, the most important thing is to practice regularly, to focus on improving your vocabulary and grammar, and to go into the test feeling confident and prepared.
Absolutely. All right, well, thanks so much for joining us today. We hope this deep talk has been helpful for you. And for all of you listening, we wish you the very best of luck with your IELTS speaking test.
Yeah, good luck. And remember, you can do it.
All right, that's it for the deep dive. Until next time, keep learning and keep exploring.
See you next time.
Bye.